Alright, so today's daf is actually daf tet, but we're going to start on chet amud bet, 15 lines from the bottom, because that's where the new subject starts. So, yeah, it's 15 lines from the bottom, but it's, we'll get through this part quickly, don't worry. Where it says, Ibayalehu, they're asking a question. Ma'ulishtamesh tachat hakora, speaking of a korah, it's right there. So what this is talking about is, again, we're talking about the mavoy satum. We're talking about an alleyway that is closed on three sides. The fourth side is open. It's open to a reshut harabim, to a public domain. So the chachamim said you can only carry in this mavoy if you have either lechi, either you have some kind of a stick, a vertical stick on the side, or you have korah, you have a horizontal stick crossing over at the end of the mavoy to remind people that they can't carry from the mavoy into the reshut harabim. That's the purpose of it. So you can't carry in the mavoy unless you have the stick reminding you not to carry out of it, because if you carry out of it, now you've carried effectively from a private domain to a public domain, which is a major no-no. So the question is, what about right underneath the korah? I want to walk right underneath the korah, not up to it, but underneath it. What is the halacha in that position? So this was discussed. This question was raised, and so there was a discussion, there was a machloket about this. Rav and Rabbi Chaya and Rabbi Yochanan amru mutar l'shtamesh tachat hakora. So Rav and Rabbi Chaya and Rabbi Yochanan said, you're allowed to carry even under the korah, no problem. Shmuel v'Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish amru asur l'shtamesh tachat hakora. But according to Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, you're not allowed to carry directly under the stick that's overhead. So lema bahab kamipalgi. So we have to understand what exactly is the basis of the machloket. What are they arguing about? Because they don't just randomly have disagreements for the fun of it. They have to have some principle underlying the disagreement. So what's the principle? Demar savar korah mishum heker, umar savar korah mishum machitza. So that one possibility is that one opinion maintains that what's the reason for this stick going over the top? The purpose of it is in order to remind you not to carry out. So as long as you're still under the stick, you're still protected, so to speak. You're still okay. However, the other view says no. Really, this korah is mishum mechitza. It's like a wall. So what do we say? We say that the inner edge of that stick, we imagine as if it's coming down as a fourth wall. So that means that underneath the stick itself, you're actually outside. Only the edge of the stick that's facing inside is, so to speak, closed off in our halachic world, even though in physical terms it's not, but in legal terms it is. But that would mean that directly under the beam, there's nothing. You have to be within the beam in order for you to be able to carry in the mavoy. That's one possibility. But then the Gemara says, Lo techulei alma korah mishum heker. No, everybody really agrees. The korah is not to create an imaginary wall. That's not the reason behind it. So we're going to dismiss that interpretation of the machloket. What is the machloket? Demar savar heker milgav, umar savar heker milevar. That one of them says, the heker is for the people outside of the mavoy, and one says it's for the people inside. Milegav means inside. So one says for the people inside. So that means that since the people inside see right up to the inner edge, so right under it, we don't want to count that part. But the people outside see the outer edge. That's what they see. So that's really what the machloket is. It's not that we have such a fundamental argument as to whether it's symbolic, a reminder, or it's an imaginary wall. The real argument is whether the reminder is serving those in the reshut harabim, that they shouldn't confuse the mavoy with the reshut harabim, or whether really it's facing inwards. The reminder is facing inwards, in which case you have to be within the mavoy, and directly under the korah will not count, but you have to be within the mavoy in order for it to count.
Why would you want the people outside to know? People inside, I understand, of course. But the people outside in the Reshut HaRashut, they can't carry there anyway.
Right. So why would they? Right. So why would they? Why would they bother? Why would they care where the Reshut HaRabim ends and where it begins? So I suppose because people will say, well, I think that the reason is because people will say, well, if they're allowed to carry in there, why can't we carry out here? In other words, the concern is that the people in the Reshut HaRabim are going to see people carrying in the alleyway and say, well, there's no difference between the alleyway and what we're doing. So if they can carry inside that alleyway, we should be able to carry in the thoroughfare. So that's why you have the stick there that people say, well, no, it's really a different area. That's why they're allowed to carry in there, but you can't carry out here. I believe that's what the Gemara is saying. Now, so that's the second interpretation. But Ibayit Iman alternative, and this is the one of many times already in this Masechet that we've had multiple interpretations of what would otherwise seem like a simple machloket, but we have another interpretation to Chulei Alma Mishum Mechitza. Everybody is interpreting it as Mechitza. So the other way, in other words, the first way of reading it was, one side said it's a reminder and one side says it's Mechitza. Second way of interpreting it is that both of them say it's a reminder. The question is it a reminder for the outside or the inside? Third way is no, everybody says it's really mechitza. But what's the question? So we can see right away, we can anticipate what it's going to be. This is what the machloket is. Temar savar chudo hapinimi yored v'sotem, umar savar chudo hachitzon yored v'sotem. The question is, okay, you're going to say that there's a force field coming down, so to speak, okay? There's an invisible wall descending from the Korah. The question is, where does it descend from? The inner edge of the Korah or the outer edge of the Korah? If it's the inner edge of the Korah, so then you have to be within. You can't be directly under the beam itself. But if it's the outer edge of the Korah, then you could stand under the Korah itself. Okay, so there are three possible ways of reading this machloket, and we don't really know what the basis of it was. So, but these are the three possibilities. Amar Rav Chisda says, "Hakol modim beben lechayayim shasur." Now, remember, there are two ways you can fix a mavoi. This mavoi is again a three-walled alleyway, basically. What happens is that the various chatzerot, the various courtyards, the way the Talmudic neighborhood was built was that you had courtyards, and the courtyards contain houses. So houses shared enclosed courtyards. Enclosed courtyards opened to a mavoi, some kind of a passageway or an alleyway, and that alleyway led you to the main thoroughfare. So the mavoi itself has three sides, and it's open on the fourth side. That fourth side goes to the main thoroughfare. You can either fix it by putting a horizontal beam over the top, or you can fix it by having a vertical beam called lechi on the side. If you have a lechi on the side, so he says everybody agrees that right next to the lechi you cannot carry. There's a machloket about whether under the cross beam you can carry, but if you used a lechi instead of a korah, because you have two options, if you use the vertical one on the side, so then you can't carry right next to it. You have to be within it. Everybody agrees that, says Rav Chisda. Okay. Ba'amine Rami Bar Chama mi Rav Chisda. So Rami Bar Chama asked Rav Chisda the following question: Na'atz shetei yetedot b'shnei kotlei mavoi mi bachutz v'niach korah al gabehen mahu. Let's say we envisioned the following circumstance. Now, normally, how do you put a korah? You put the korah directly on the mavoi. So the mavoi has walls going upwards, and where do you put the korah? Across them. But what if you put two poles in front of the entrance of the mavoi and you put the korah on that? You said, you know what? I want to be able to use every inch of this mavoi. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the korah not on top of the inner lip of the mavoi, but actually outside the mavoi, because I'm going to put two sticks right outside the walls. Like imagine your door. You wanted to put something in, a little shade, a little thing for shade in front of your front door. You put two poles and you hang it right in front of the door. So it's actually outside of the doorway, but it's when you walk out the door, you're right under it. So he says, what would be the case in a case like that? Is that good enough? Or does it have to actually be resting on the mavoi itself? Here, it's essentially the same, but it's outside. So what do we do? Amar leisatum ledivrei amatir asur, ledivrei aoser mutar. According to the one who normally allows you to stand under the korah, okay, he's going to say it's no good. And according to the one that says that you can't stand under the korah, he's going to say it is good. Why? So we can understand it like this. Because according to the one that says you could stand under the korah, what was the reason? Because he says the outer lip of the korah is what descends. So if the outer lip of that crossbeam is what encloses the mavoi, then we have a problem. Because now that outer lip is actually separated. It's not over the mavoi. Because you put the mavoi right outside. You put the korah right outside of the mavoi. So, and the korah we assume has a width to it, right? So what's going to happen is that you're going to have now Rashi actually explains it. He says that what's going to happen is that since the she'ena stima mechuberet lektalim. V'yesh avir benehem. The problem is that you're going to have more than 3 tefachim between where the edge of that korah is and where the mavoi ends. So it's not really going to be over the mavoi. However, according to the one that said that you're not allowed to be under the korah when it's on the mavoi, why did he say that? Because the inner lip of the stick is what comes down. Well, if the inner lip of the stick is what comes down, even if it's right outside the mavoi, it's still going to be close enough, that inner lip of the board, that it's within 3 tefachim of the mavoi, and it's no problem. It will come down and it will close it. Okay, so ironically, if it's outside, they're going to switch positions. Now, they still won't say that you can be under the korah. The one that says you can't be under the korah still won't say you could be under it. The question is whether this korah counts for the mavoi at all, or whether, if really what's happening with the korah is that the outer lip of it is descending and closing. If it's too far from the mavoi, then it's not really enclosing the mavoi anymore. It's not really part of the mavoi anymore, and it's going to be like just an open mavoi with nothing enclosing its fourth side. So we could see, they probably have a picture of it here in the back of this Gemara, so that you can envision what we're talking about here. Here we go. That's a good one. That's a good picture. So here you could see it's right outside. It's hanging right outside. So if the outer lip is what descends, the outer lip is too far from the actual body of the walls. But if it's the inner lip that descends, then the inner lip is close enough to the walls that we could really say that it's going to correct the problem. So that's the way that we're understanding the Gemara so far. Now, it's going to be within. It's not going to be within because the board is too big. Because the board is going to be too big.
Is it not far enough? Because we were talking about 4 tefachim.
Right. Well,
to become a wall. Otherwise.
Well, what happens is that since you sit, that's to make a wall. But here we're talking about the distance between this wall. If this wall is disconnected from the body of the alley, so it's not really considered part of it. So if we're looking at the outer lip of the board, and let's say the board is 4 tefachim. So now if the outer lip of the board is what comes down, it's already 4 tefachim away from the mavoi. If the inner lip is what comes down, it's right next to the mavoi. So that's what will happen. Can you have it right outside the mavoi or not? Will be contingent on the same argument. According to Rav Chisda, that's what says Rava Amar. Rava says that L'divrei ha'oser nami asur. Even according to the one that says that it is the inner lip of the board that goes down and makes the invisible wall, even he will say that if the board is outside of the alley and it's not on the walls of the alley, it's no good. Ba'enan kora al gabe mavoi veleka, because it must be, Rava says, that this crossbeam rests on the walls of the mavoi. It can't be hanging outside on 2 poles like that. It has to be actually on the mavoi itself. Rav Adabar Matana raised an objection to Rava. Hayeta korato mishucha otluya. If you had a situation where the board was mishucha or tluya, so Rashi says mashmar rechoka min haketalim, that it's far from the walls. Okay, so this board, this crossbeam is far from the walls, otluya, or it was hanging. In other words, it was suspended, let's say, by a pole, rather than being directly resting on the walls of the mavoi. And he has pictures in here of what that would look like. This would be where it is hanging. This is tluya. So there's something else holding it up. There's a bar holding it up, so it's not actually resting on the walls themselves. So either it's far away from the walls, or rather than resting on the walls, we put a support so that it's there, but it's not actually resting on the walls. So what do we do in a case like that? So pachot migimel, if it's less than 3 tefachim away from the sides, ein tzarich lavi korah acheret, then you don't need. So in other words, if it's within 3 tefachim of distance from the walls, either the sides or the front. In other words, it doesn't matter. If it's not, it has to be within 3 tefachim. If it's not, so then it's no. If it's within, it's no problem. However, gimel, if it's 3 tefachim away, tzarich lavi korah acheret, then it's no good. It's not going to count. So if it's either suspended, and we're talking about a situation where it's too far, let's say forward from the mavoi. It's not in the mavoi, but it's forward. Or if it's suspended and the edges of the korah are not close to the walls, but they're 3 tefachim away from the walls. Okay, so then it's no good. It's not considered really part of the mavoi. But if it's within 3 tefachim, it should be good. So why does Rava say that? So then it should be that if the inner part of the board, in the case that we said before, if the inner part of the board is what comes down and closes off the mavoi, then if it's close, it shouldn't be a problem. Because as long as it's within 3 tefachim, it should be good. 3 tefachim is 3 of these. 3 of this width. So if it's within that distance, then even though it's outside the alley, since the inner lip of the board is what we envision as closing it off, we shouldn't have a problem. So why are you saying there's a general machloket between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim about this principle of lavud. The principle of lavud is that if two things are very close together, we consider them as one. We don't look at a small airspace as being significant. So the question is, what is a small airspace? According to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, it has to be less than 4 tefachim. According to the Chachamim, which is the definitive view, less than 3 tefachim. So if you have 3 of this width, 1, 2, and then another one, that width is the amount of width that would be, or the amount of length that is considered to still be close enough that the two things are not separated within 3 tefachim. More than 3 tefachim is too much. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, you even have 4. 4 tefachim. As long as it's within 4 tefachim, two things are within 4 tefachim of each other, it's like they're sealed, halachically. Okay, legally speaking. It's not a breach. But that's a general question. But the point here is, aren't we talking about a case, the Gemara says, where mishucha, where it says that this korah is pulled away from the walls? It means it's outside the walls, like the case that we discussed. It's outside, but it's within 3 tefachim of the walls. So even though it's outside, it still should be considered part of the mavoi. And tiluya is when it's inside the walls, but it's hanging, so it's not resting on. It's not resting directly on the walls themselves. Okay, isn't that the case? And yet it's saying that as long as it's close enough, it's good enough. Lo idi v'idi mi bifnim. No, both are talking about when it's within. It has to be within. Mishucha miruach achat utluya mishtei ruchot. What does mishucha mean? It means that only one side of the korah is resting on the wall. The other one isn't. Tluya means neither side is resting on the walls. So, because what might you have thought? If I told you that if one side of the crossbeam is resting on the wall and the other one almost makes it, it's within 3 tefachim, let's say it's within 9 inches or whatever it is of the other wall, or within a foot of the other wall. So, you might say, okay, it's still good. But if it's in the middle and neither side is touching the walls, even though on the left it's within 3 tefachim, and on the right it's within 3 tefachim, how many extra imaginary tefachim are we going to add here? Because in total you're going to have to add 2.9 tefachim on the left and 2.9 tefachim on the right. That's way more than we normally add. So you might think that's not good. So the answer is each gap is judged separately. That since the gap on the right side between the board and the side is less than 3, and the gap on the left side between the board and the side is less than 3, it's still good. But nobody says if it's outside the mavoi that it's good. Rava says that such a thing is not going to exist. It has to be within the walls. Even if it's not resting on them, it has to be halachically recognized or legally recognized as resting on them because the distance is close enough. That's what Rava says. So Kamash Malan. Rav Ashi Amar Rav Ashi says, Mishucha v'itluya. What about Mishucha v'hitluya? Double distance. So what is this talking about? V'hechidame kigon shena'atz shtei tedot akumot al shnei kotlei mavoi she'en begovan gimel ve'en ba'akmimutan gimel. So what is he saying? This is a very funny case. So what you have is sticking out of the sides of the mavoi is going to be like a bent hook. It's like a hook. So there's 2 planes of a hook, right? There's the horizontal and the vertical. So he says the horizontal is within 3 tefachim, less than 3 tefachim. The vertical is also within 3 tefachim. So what happens is that horizontally speaking, it's within 3 tefachim of the wall, but it's distant, but it's within 3. It's not resting on it, but it's within 3. Vertically, it's not resting on it, but it's again within 3. So in the previous case, what did we have to do? We had to consider a gap on the right closed and consider a gap on the left closed, and that was okay. But what about if it's the same gap, but we have to close less than 3 tefachim in vertical distance and less than 3 in horizontal distance? Can you do that? Can you go so far as basically to almost seal off 6 tefachim, almost 6? but you're doing one on a vertical plane and one on a horizontal plane, do we consider these also as two different distances? So here it gives you the example right here. So it's in horizontally less than 3 tefachim and vertically less than 3. Okay? So can we close the horizontal and the vertical gap, both of them, or do we have only 3 tefachim to spend on each side of this board? So if it's 1.5 height and 1.5 horizontal, it's not going to be good. So how do we look at it? That's the question that the Gemara is asking, and what Rav Ashi is asking. What are we going to do in a case like that? So he says that Mahu detema, what might you have thought? O lavud amrinan, o chavot amrinan. You either get to close the horizontal gap or the vertical gap. Now both of them. So therefore, what do you see? Lavud v'chavut lo amrinan. You might think that you can't say both. Kamash malan. It comes along to tell you that you can. You can close both. So even though it's 2.5 tefachim above the wall and 2.5 tefachim away from it, we're not talking about outside, we're talking about within the mavoi wall, because we're not getting into that issue now. We're assuming it's within the airspace of the mavoi, but it's less than 3 raised, less than 3 pulled away. So still, you can close the gap, even though, let's say, you're closing a total of 5 tefachim. You're closing a total of 5, but you're closing only horizontally only 2.5 and vertically only 2.5. So it's okay. It's still viewed as 2 different spaces, not as one big space of 5 tefachim.
Hypotenuse doesn't matter; it's the legs of the triangle.
Exactly. You could look at it that way. So, Tanei Rabbi Zakai kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Zakai taught in front of Rabbi Yochanan, Ben lechayim v'tachat hakora nidon kakarmelit. The place between lechayim, in other words, if you have a mavoi and you put the horizontal beam at the end of the mavoi instead of the vertical beam on the side instead of the horizontal, that's called lechi. Or the korah, the horizontal beam that's across the top, underneath it is kikarmelit. What does kikarmelit mean? It means a place which rabbinically you're prohibited from carrying. So he's taking a position on what we said before. He's saying that in both cases, you right flush with that lechi or flush with that beam, you can carry. Only up to it, but not under it, and not next to it. Amar le, he said to him, Pok tanei livara. He said to him, go out and tani livara, go teach that outside. What does that mean? I don't agree with it. Meaning, don't bring that ridiculous idea in here. We don't want to hear that. Get out. He kicked him out for saying it. He said that's not true because Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says that you're allowed to carry under the Koran and next to the lechi. He says you're allowed to. So he didn't like that. Amar Abai says, Mistabra milte Rabbi Yochanan tachad hakorav ben lechayin asur. That Abaye said, what Rabbi Yochanan said makes sense if the beam is overhead. But if the beam is next to you, it makes sense that would be prohibited. Rabbi Yochanan was only talking about where the beam is overhead. V'Rava amar ben lechayim nami mutar. And Rava says no, even next to the beam is good. In other words, even next to it when it's when it's vertical, is also good. So what Rabbi Yochanan meant that whether you are underneath the cross beam or you are next to the side beam, you're allowed to carry in that area. And he says, Amar Rava says, Mina aminala. Where do I get this from? Because when Rav Dimi came from Israel, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, that it says in Masekhet Shabbat, we learned it in Masekhet Shabbat, that if you have a space which is less than 4 by 4 tefachim, so it's a very small space, and it's standing right in between a private domain and a public domain. So you can't carry from private to public or public to private. But it's okay for somebody in the private domain to put something down on it, and it's okay for someone in the public domain to put something down on it, as long as they don't put something down, as long as somebody in the private domain doesn't put something on this, and then a person from the public domain takes it. Or vice versa, a person from the public domain will put it there, and a person from the private domain will take it into the private domain. As long as you don't do that, you're okay. Why? Because that area itself is called Mekom Petur. It's called a place that is exempt. It's too small to have any halachic significance. So what does Rava say? He's saying the same thing here. The little area next to the lechi, or the little area under the korah, it's mekom petur. It's considered to be an exempt area. It's not significant enough, it's not substantial enough to have a halachic status, to have any identity. So therefore, we're not going to say that that area is going to be prohibited to carry. So therefore, under the korah and next to the lechi, it doesn't matter whether you chose a vertical beam or a horizontal beam, under it or next to it, you should be able to carry there because such a small space doesn't have any legal significance. And we're not going to apply. Abaye says, Hatam begavoa gimel. Abaye says, you're wrong. Because what is it talking about there when it talks about a little place in between the private and the public domain? It's talking about a place, not just a space that's less than 4 by 4 tefachim, but that's elevated 3 tefachim off the ground. Because if it's flush with the Reshut HaRabim, if it's flush with the public domain, if it's flat, then it's going to be subsumed under the public domain. So we're talking about something which is raised up above the public domain. So because it's raised 3 tefachim and it's a small area, it's like a little pedestal, okay? It's neither public domain nor private domain. But if it's flat ground and it's just a little area that is, that is less than 4 by 4 tefachim, that's not going to be. You're not going to be allowed to carry from the private or the public domain into that area. So he says, here, what do you have? You just have the lechi next to you. You just have the board next to you. So why should you be able to carry there? It's not elevated. That area is not elevated above the ground. So it should be the same as anything else. So Abaye, so that's what Abaye says. Amar Abaye says, Mina aminala. Where do I get my position that you can't carry there? Okay, that you could for the korah on top, but you can't for the lechi on the side. So he says, Amar Rav Chama bar Gurya Amar Rav, because Rav Chama bar Gurya said the name of Rav. Tocha petach tzarich lechi achel atiro. That if you have, now sometimes you can have like this, a mavoy, you can have an alley, that the walls on the ends curve in a little bit. So you don't even have to put a lechi. Because it serves as one. Because the wall turns in a little bit on the sides. It curves in. It's not a complete enclosure, but it curves in. So because it curves in, it's considered like having a side post. But next to the side post itself, you would have to put another lechi outside to use that place. So what does that show you? Right next to side post is not good enough. Because even if you had naturally occurring side posts, so to speak, because the walls curved in, you wouldn't be allowed to stand in that area without having another side post to permit it. Now let me show you a picture to give you a sense of what exactly he's talking about here. I don't think Rashi has this one. Rashi has a lot of good drawings, but he doesn't have one for this one. So let me see if he has one for in the back of this Gemara, if they give us one. So you could see here that there's a naturally occurring curvature here. See how there's a curve here? Because the real mavoy is here, and then it does like this. There's like a bump. So it makes an area. But this area here, you need another lechi if you want to carry in this area here. Because this area here is separate. This area serves to permit this area by enclosing it, but it itself is not enclosed. Okay, so you need another lechi. So what is so from that you see what? That next to a lechi, you can't carry without another lechi. Because that's what the case is saying. So what do we say about that? V'ha'amar Rav Hanin. V'chitema, and maybe you'll tell me the itbe dalid al dalid. We're talking about a case where that lechi is very large. It's because that area is so large, right? Because that indent in the wall is big. It's 4 by 4 tefachim. So it's like almost that it's making its own area. It's almost making its own mavoy. That's why. So he says, Amar Rav Hanin bar Rava, Amar Rav. Rav Hanin bar Rava said in the name of Rav, that we said explicitly that even if it's not that big, you still need another lechi to allow it, because since that bump in the wall is permitting everything within, so next to it is prohibited without another enclosure at the end, even if it's a small area. So he says, from that I infer that right next to a lechi, you can't carry. Rava, what will Rava say about this case? Hatam. So what's Rava going to do with it? Now Rava is stuck because Rava is saying that you can carry next to the lechi. So what does he do with this case where you see that the walls jut in and yet you're not allowed to carry next to where the walls jut in? So what is Rava going to say? He says, Rava hatam de patuch lekarmelit, aval lereshut harabim mishareh. So he says, I'm sorry. Hatam de patuach lekarmelit. He says, what are we talking about here? Where this mavoi is not open to a public domain, it's open to a karmelit. What's a karmelit? A place which is not enclosed, but isn't a thoroughfare. So basically, it's considered rabbinically prohibited to carry. It's like a rabbinic reshut harabim. So biblically, it has no status at all. Mina Torah, you'd be allowed to carry in the karmelit. Let's say in an unenclosed backyard, an open field. It's not a public thoroughfare. You'd be allowed to carry there biblically, rabbinically prohibited. So he says, when the mavoi is open to a karmelit, there you can't carry by the lechi. But when it's open to a public domain, you can. So the Gemara says, what? What are you talking about? The citizen is at the bottom, and the foreigner is in the heavens. What does that mean? It's like you treat an immigrant better than you treat a citizen. We could say maybe that's true here. I don't know. I don't comment on that, but that's what they say. They pay for their college. They don't want to pay for my college. So the citizen is very low. The immigrant is very high. In other words, how could it be that if this mavoi is open to a reshut harabim, which is like the biblical serious thing, there you can carry right next to the lechi. But when it's open to a rabbinically prohibited area, now you can't carry next to the lechi. What kind of logic is that? It's the opposite. It's reverse. So what's going on? So he says, yes, matzah minat mino v'ne'or. What happens is, one type finds its own type and reawakens. So what does he mean? He means when the reshut... See, this little area next to the lechi would be too small to have any legal significance. If this mavoi opened to a reshut harabim, that little area between the mavoi and the reshut harabim, right next to the lechi, it's too small. It doesn't have any significance. So we just say, you know what, you can carry there too, because it has no significance. But when it's right next to a karmelit, the karmelit has a rabbinic status, right? And in other words, biblically, the karmelit has no status. And biblically, the area right next to the lechi also has no status. So you know what? We blend them together. So actually it becomes a negative, because now we blend them together. So when you're in the mavoi, up to the lechi, you're okay. But the lechi now, right next to the lechi, becomes part of what's outside. Because the lack of identity biblically that the side of the lechi has, and the lack of biblical identity that the karmelit has, merge together into one. So it seems illogical, but it actually makes perfect sense. That when the distinction is stark between the two, one is biblically prohibited and one is nothing. But when there's not such a distinction, that one is only rabbinically prohibited and the other one is also only rabbinically prohibited, so then we merge the two and we say that from the lechi and on you can't carry. So it's a very interesting logic that Rava is saying here. So now Amar le Ravuna b'rei de Rav Yoshua le Rava. So Ravuna, the son of Rav Yoshua, said to Rava, "Va'at lo tisbarad ben lechayayin asur." Don't you agree that you can't carry next to the lechi? How can you say that you can carry next to the lechi? Va'amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar bar Chana said that in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, "Mavoi shiritzafo belechayin." He said that if you had a mavoi that you made many lechayim. Okay, you made many of them. So what happens? Pachot midalet. Each one is separated from the other only by less than 4 tefachim. Banu lemachloket Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel v'Rabbanan. LeRabban Shimon ben Gamliel de Amar Amrinan Lavud Mishtamesh ad Hudo Apnimi Shel Lechi Apnimi. LeRabbanan de Amrei Lo Amrinan Lavud Mishtamesh ad Hudo Apnimi Shel Chitzon. Aval ben lechayin. So what does he explain? Like this. So this is the case, and they have a nice illustration here of what the case looks like. We're talking about a situation where the wall of the mavoi has multiple boards along it. So look, so what you have is multiple lechayin. 1, 2, 3, 4 they have. In between each one is more than 3 tefachim. So according to the rabbis, because there's more than 3 tefachim between each of these boards, they're separate from one another. So the first one doesn't mean anything. Second one, nothing. Third one, nothing. Last one, that's the one that's permitting the mavoi. So we only care up to the last one. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says the entire thing, he holds that anything within 4 tefachim is still connected. So these things that are only 3 tefachim from one another, so they're all blended into one board. So you have one really big lechi. So where can you carry up to? Only up to the inner lip of the first one. Because that's all considered one big board, stretching back. But what do you see? Right next to it, though, nobody's going to let you carry. Right next to the lechi, according to the rabbis, right next to the outside lechi, for sure not. According to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right next to any of these lechayin, you can't carry, because they're all one board that is permitting the mavoi. That is the way that we have to look at it. So therefore, how could you say, he asked Rava, how could you suggest that you're allowed to carry next to the lechi? Nobody really says that. So the answer is, Rava will tell you. Hatam nami de patuach lekarmelit. I'm going to use the same old trick I used before. You're right. In this case, you can't carry next to the lechi. But you know what? I'm going to tell you that hatam nami de patuach lekarmelit. Again, this is a mavoi that's opened to a karmelit, not to a reshut harabim, not to a public domain, but to a place that's only prohibited midrabanan. But if it were open to a public domain, it would be allowed. So again, we ask the question, how could it be that when it's open to a public domain, you're more lenient? You're going to allow me to carry right next to the lechi. But when it's open to a place that biblically is not even prohibited to carry, it's only rabbinic, there you're going to tell me I'm not allowed to carry. So again, he's going to say, yes, again, because that little area next to the lechi is biblically insignificant, and outside is also biblically insignificant because it's a karmelit, they meld together into one, and therefore you can't carry midrabanan even next to the lechi in that case. That's what Rava says. Ravashi says, Ravashi amar kegon shiritzafo b'lechayim pachot mi arba'a b'meshech arba amot l'Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel da amar amrinan lavud hava le mavoi v'tzarich lechayach el hatiro o l'Rabbanan da amre lo amrinan lavud lo tzarich lechayach el hatiro. So Ravashi says, I can save the day in a different way. I can tell you that really you're allowed to carry next to the lechi, even in this case. Rava gave up too quickly. He surrendered too quickly and said that you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi. But I'm going to tell you, no matter what the mavoi is open to, you can carry next to the lechi. What are we talking about here? We're talking about a case where there were many lechayim placed, many of them, up to a distance of 4 amot. So what happens? So according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, what do you have? It's such a large piece, because they're so close, they're close enough together, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, that whole thing is one thing. It says it's now a new alley by itself, because you made a new wall. You added a wall. We put all those sticks together into a new wall, a 4 amot wall. So now it needs another lechi on the outside if you want to be able to carry next to it. The rabbis say, no, that these are all separate from one another. Okay? They're all separate from one another. And that's the machloket. The machloket is, do you need another lechi now because you created another alley? They're not arguing about, they're not even discussing the issue. It could very well be that you can carry right next to the lechi. But the question is, do you need an extra lechi here, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? Because these sticks are now merged into one board. The board is so big that it's not a lechi anymore, it's a wall. And therefore, since it's a wall of the mavoi, you need another stick on the end to permit it. It's too big to be considered a reminder. It just looks like an addition to the wall now, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. That's the argument. But everybody could actually say that you can carry right next to the lechi. That's not even the concern here in this discussion. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan da Amrei. I'm sorry, no. So we Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, leheve kanir'eh mi bachutz v'shaveh mi bifnim. So according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, though, it should be like a case where something is visible on the outside, but invisible on the inside. Why? Because we're assuming here that whatever in this series of lechayin, the last one sticks out at the end. It's going to stick out a little bit on the end. So even though to the person inside the mavoi it looks like one big wall, the fact is that it sticks out of the edge of the mavoi. As even Rashi has a picture of it here, a little tiny picture, but it sticks out of the edge of the wall. So because it sticks out of the end of the wall, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel should say the part that sticks out of the wall is not 4 amot. It's not big enough to be considered a wall itself. It's just a little bit. So since from to an outsider it's visible, it should be considered a lechi. Even though inside it's flush with the wall and it just looks like an extension of the wall, to an person standing outside the mavoy, they could see that it's a separate piece that's jutting out. So it shouldn't be a problem. So the Gemara says, Midi hu ta'ama ila Rabbi Yochanan. This whole discussion has been for the sake of Rabbi Yochanan, who says you can carry next to the lechi. Ha ki ata Ravin amar Rabbi Yochanan, but Ravin said that Rabbi Yochanan said nirami bachutz v'shaveh bebifnim eno nidon mishum lechi. According to Rabbi Yochanan, even something which can be seen from the outside as distinct from the wall, if inside the mavoy it seems like it's flush with the wall, it's no good. So he wouldn't count that as significant. He's going to say that according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, since you cannot see, if you're standing inside the mavoy, all you're going to see is a panel on the wall. You're not going to see it as a lechi. It's just a piece of the wall. It's too big. And since we're taking all those sticks and we're merging them together, it's going to just seem like a big piece of wood, halachically. You're going to need another lechi on the end to permit carrying there. In that whole mavoy. In the whole mavoy you need another piece of wood, because that piece of wood is invalid, it's too big. According to the rabbis, because there's interruptions of 3 tefachim between the pieces, it's not too big to serve as a lechi in that case. But the point is that the fact that it juts out on the end and somebody outside could see it is not going to help us. Because according to Rabbi Yochanan, it has to be visible from inside the mavoy, not from outside. So if you're walking by outside, you'll see a piece of wood jutting out from the mavoy and say, oh, there's a lechi there. But if you're inside, it just looks like there's a panel of wood. You're not going to see that. Because from the perspective of the person inside, it's just an extension of the wall. So that's why we can't use that to permit. Itmar, it was stated, Nirabi bifnim v'shaveh b'chutz nidam b'shum lechi nirabi b'chutz v'shaveh b'bifnim. Rabbi Chayav, Rabbi Shimon, Berebi. Chad amar nidon mishum lechi, chad amar eno nidon mishum lechi. So we had a machloket. If it's visible inside, but it can't be seen outside, it's definitely good for a lechi. But if it's only visible to somebody outside, and not to somebody inside, that if you're standing in the mavoy, you won't be able to see it, it'll look like an extension of the wall, there it's a machloket. We have a machloket between Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon Berebi. One says, Chad amar nidom mishum lechi, v'chad amar eno nidom mishum lechi. One is going to say that we count that, and one is going to say we don't count that. In other words, does the fact that people outside see it make it something distinct, or does the person standing inside the mavoy have to be able to see it? And here in the back, they certainly have an example. So you can have, look, nirabi bachutz, where there's an indent here. This is nirami bifnim. The person standing inside could see it, but a person walking along here won't see it because it's indented. You see that? Here, you have the indent is on the outside. So the person outside sees that there's an indent, but the person inside doesn't, just sees flush with the wall. Right? So depending on the design, that's what we're talking about. So where the person inside wouldn't see it, the person outside would see it, is that considered a qualified mavoy? Is it a lechid mavoy, for lack of a better word? Does it work? So so we have to figure out who said what, though. We know that Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon Rabbi argued about this, but we don't know who said what. So tistayem the Rabbi Chiyahu the Amar Nidon Mishum Lechi. We can conclude that it was actually Rabbi Chia who said that we consider it a lechi. Okay, why? Ditane Rabbi Chia, because Rabbi Chia taught kotel shetzido echad kanus mechavero ben sheni rabbi bachutz v'shaveh mibifnim uven sheni rabbi bifnim v'shaveh mibachutz nidon mishum lechi. So because he said that if you have a wall that's indented in, one side of it is indented like we just saw, whether it can be seen from the inside but it looks flush from the outside, or it looks flush from the outside or it looks indented from the outside, but it looks flush from the inside. It doesn't matter as long as it looks indented, either to somebody on the outside or to somebody on the inside. It's good. It doesn't have to be that it's clear that it's indented to the person inside. It's good enough that it's indented from the perspective of a passerby outside. So tistayem, we see from this that it was Rabbi Chia indeed who said the lenient view, that even if it's only visible from the outside as a lechi, it's enough. Tistayem, we can conclude. Rabbi Yochanan didn't Rabbi Yochanan himself hear this teaching of Rabbi Chia? Rabbi Chia was teaching a baraita. He was teaching an authoritative teaching. So how can Rabbi Yochanan disagree with this? How can Rabbi Yochanan say that no, if it's only visible to the outside, it's not good enough? It has to be visible to the people inside the alley to count. Rabbi Chia is teaching it authoritatively. So didn't he know about this? So the answer is, Ela shemiya levelo savarla. He heard it, but he didn't agree with it. He doesn't have to accept every baraita that Rabbi Chia teaches. He disagreed with it. Rabbi Chia nami lo savarla. And Rabbi Chia himself, maybe he didn't hold like it either then. In other words, if you're going to tell me that Rabbi Yochanan heard this teaching but dismissed it, and he was more stringent and said that it has to be visible to the person inside that there's an indent, so maybe Rabbi Chia, who told the teaching, also didn't really agree with it. So you told me that we can conclude from the fact that Rabbi Chia said this authoritative statement that he must agree with it. That he must be the one who says that an indent, even if it's only visible to the outside, is good enough. But that's not true, because Rabbi Yochanan heard the teaching and he didn't accept it. Maybe Rabbi Chia reported the teaching and he didn't accept it either. How do you know he's the one who subscribed to it? So, how can you compare the two? We understand how Rabbi Yochanan didn't agree with the teaching. He didn't teach the teaching, for God's sake. It wasn't him. How can you blame him? But when it comes to Rabbi Chia, if he didn't agree with it, why is he telling it? Why is he sharing it? If he doesn't agree with it, why is he stating it as an anonymous statement, an authoritative statement? That doesn't make any sense. Therefore, we must assume that he does agree with that teaching. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna. Rabba bar Rav Huna says, "Nirabi b'chutz v'shavam b'ivnim nidom mishum lechi." According to Rabba bar Rav Huna, if it can be seen from the outside but not from the inside, it's still good enough. Amar Rabba raised an objection to this. Umotvinan ashmatin. We raised an objection to it from the following: Chatzer ktana shnifrata ligdola, gdola muteret uktana asura, mipnei shehi kepitcha shel gdola, ve'im ita ktana nami tishtere banir'a mibachutz v'shaveh mibifnim. So the question is like this: that if there's the case is you have two courtyards adjacent to one another, the small courtyard's wall that now they're not connected. They share a wall. The wall breaks. And now the entire wall, the entire small courtyard is open on its fourth side into the large courtyard. But the large courtyard's walls are larger. They're wider. So there are actually two sides jutting out. So if you're in the large courtyard, what do you see? You see on that side two walls. There's a piece on the right and a piece on the left and an opening in the middle that goes into the small courtyard. If you're in the small courtyard, what do you see? Just a wide open. That's all you see is open, because the wall's completely gone from the perspective of the small courtyard, right? You're not going to see anything. So what does it say? The small courtyard now can't carry anymore because they're open to the large courtyard. And they don't have an eruv chatzerot. They don't have a joint. What they had to make was an eruvei chatzerot. When there is shared space between groups, they have to take some bread and make what's called eruvei chatzerot, that they're sharing their space. They're pooling their space together into one. They're uniting it into one. They didn't do that with this group because they didn't have a shared entrance before. It just broke. The wall fell down. So they can't. But the gedolah, for the people in the big room, in the big chatzer, what can they do? They can carry. Why? Because as far as they're concerned, they still have a fourth wall. It just has an opening that leads into the small one. So it has a doorway. So what? We can't carry into the small chatzer, but we can carry in our own courtyard, because our own courtyard still has four walls. It's just that the fourth wall has an opening in the middle of it that goes into the small courtyard. And the small courtyard is wide open on its fourth side, so they can't carry in there anymore, because it's wide open into an area they're not allowed to carry. But the large courtyard, it's not wide open on its fourth side into an area they can't carry, because remnants of that fourth wall are still there. So they're allowed to carry in their own courtyard. So he says, if it's true that walls that you can't see from the inside still count, so why can't the people in the small courtyard still carry? Because really, when you're in the small courtyard, all you see are the walls on your right and left, and you go right into the big courtyard. But really, what's there? Really, here and here is the rest of the wall of the large courtyard. When you're in the small courtyard, you can't see it. But that's the reality. So to somebody in the large courtyard, they see you as having a wall. Right? They would see you as having a wall. So why? So that proves, from the fact that the people in the small courtyard are not allowed to carry, that proves that jutting out on the side, that since they can't see it from the inside, it doesn't count for them. Right? It's good logic. It's good logic. So that's where that's his argument. So, and then they're going to go into a discussion here that takes you all the way to the next daf. So instead of doing that, we'll stop with the question. We're going to leave a cliffhanger, okay? He wants to prove from this case that you can see that walls that you cannot see from the inside, that jut out on the sides, are not considered walls for the benefit of those on the inside. You have to be able to see them from the place that you are located in order to be able to benefit from them. So we're going to, and he thinks he concluded that from this case. So we're going to see an attempt to reinterpret the case in a way that will salvage it, and then a totally different perspective, but we'll continue with it.